For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Father Richard Finn. I'm the regent here at Blackfriars. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this special colloquium looking at food. I shall fairly shortly hand over to the chair, Right Honourable John Battle. I'm delighted that John, who's one of our fellows, has come down to this event. But before I do, I'd just like to share a small personal reflection on food. When I was about 16, I developed advanced peritonitis and spent several weeks in hospital, nil by mouth. And spending that time nil by mouth, I suppose, was the nearest I've got through deprivation to experiencing anything of what the horror of real hunger is. And of course, at the time I was so ill that hunger was in a way not the worst thing that was happening to me. But it just gave me a sense of how awful it would be not to have my daily bread. And at the same time, of course, nil by mouth, I was removed from the sociability of meals, of not being part of that way of being in community. Something that came home to me, obviously, on entering the order. I should confess to being a repeat viewer of Babette's Feast, that film which has so much to say about the sacramental value of food, the way in which what is shared can be the entry into the transcendence of division, rancour, a means towards mirth and forgiveness. I hope we won't have too much cause for forgiveness today, though I do apologise that some of our members, our participants, didn't get the updated start time for the day. So there'll be some people coming who are thinking it was a 10:30 start. So that I must apologise for and beg your forgiveness. But I hope there will be some mirth as the day progresses. I'm very grateful for the people who are sponsoring today, for the tablet, the Pastoral Review and the Midlands Co-op, who are helping us with the practicalities, and to Will Pujay at the Vaults Cafe at St Mary the Virgin, who's actually providing lunch for us here. We could not arrive at a topic the questions of which were more complex or more urgent. How our food is produced, how our food is distributed, what kinds of community we create in the sharing and consumption of food, and indeed the theological dimension of how food comes to us. And I know that Ankel will be addressing that theme very strongly on the basis, not least, of his recent and important book on that topic. But I would also like to ask John if you would just say a few words at the opening of our day to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I represent a cake slice of inner city Leeds, and I come to this conference to listen and to learn really a huge range of topics connected together. Yesterday, I was in Leeds and we had a community meeting of one of the community groups that pulls together the youngsters with the sure starts, the parent supports groups, and the youth work. And there are about 500 people discussing the needs of West Leeds. And amazingly, and it's a team of people that's met over the years, someone stood up in the middle of the conversation of where we were going, it was an annual review, and said, what we need to do is to reintroduce tables between the sofa and the TV into every household. And the idea being that people don't sit and share a meal at all. And that it was, part of the conversation was to keep people away from the television and form a barrier between them and the television, at least create some space in their lives. But the other was the notion of sharing a meal and how that interacted between parents and children, which I thought was quite a wonderful and interesting idea. A survey around the room, only out of about 500 people, only 40 had a table. Most people would eat on their knee in the front room. I just thought, it's quite interesting, isn't it? The role of the meal, the shared meal. I just reflect on that. The other thing I want to mention is tomorrow I actually go to Zimbabwe to look at the distribution of food aid by the World Food Programme to what was formerly the bread basket of the whole of Southern Africa. And we got to note, Mr. Mugabe said, I didn't need to come. We're going with the International Development Select Committee. We didn't need to come because there wasn't a food crisis in Africa. And anyway, didn't I realise that 30 to 40% of agricultural products in sub-Saharan countries have always been lost before they've been harvested anyway. As if there was a write-off factor. I mean, it's probably true, but perhaps we should make sure that the harvest is collected, was my view. But we're going to look at distribution of food, and what he wanted us to do is, of course, send us the money, he said, so we can spend it rather than getting everything. There was a great issue there. So, tables in inner city leads, food security for the people in Africa. And then yesterday morning, I don't know if anybody had a chance to hear it, Professor John Bennington, who's the government's chief scientist, was on the radio. Because he's just written a paper for the magazine, the American magazine Science, to say that the top issue that brings that kind of collection of items together, as it were, gathers in the themes, is food. And he actually used the phrase, he said, of course, we will need a step change in agriculture by 2030, never mind 2050. We will need a 50% increase in food production because of pressure of increasing population, 9 billion by 2050, but also increasing prosperity in developing countries, for which also we waste of food because it's not used properly. And then he said, and climate change is an ancillary aspect to that as well. I think in government, under the heading of science, its background work, under the science department, if you like, the government funds some teams of researchers that take up particular topics. One of them, for example, is the ageing population and the challenges that will bring. Under Charles Godfrey is a foresight team focusing now on food for the first time ever. And I think it's been Professor John Bennington that's been pushing that and has been insisting that we need to look at issues such as technology, crop yields, the ability to increase the infrastructure for distribution of food. He also was challenged on the radio. Isn't the message, he says, the radio didn't want to hear the detail, of course, and the complexity of the problems. He said, is the answer that we should all become vegetarian then now? To which he replied that he thought that was a rather too simplistic an approach. He said, it's not so simple. Think about the cattle that live on the grasslands. He said, even ploughing up the grasslands would release CO2. So the answers are not as simple as we sometimes think. So I learned from that. There's a complex of issues there that we need to bring together, that bring North and South together, bring together our daily own personal interaction and habits in this, as well as facing some of the larger challenges that look at both the science and technology, but also the human interaction there. So I think it's a wonderful, large topic to bring things together. And I think the fact that we focused on that day as a colloquium today, John Bennington's article's not yet, I think it's out in Science in America, it's not yet readily available. He did publish a lecture that he gave to the Royal Society in Edinburgh last February. But I suspect this is an idea that's whose time has come in a way, and it's a theme that's going to be much more resonating with the people's attempts to get to grips with the 21st century. So the whole approach fought for food as opposed to the other way around. we may well be very far ahead of the game. And I'm just hoping from what I learned today and what we do today that it doesn't remain, as it were, locked in this room, and it resonates out a little bit more. So there's a very big conversation to be had around this issue that pulls things together and lets more people rather than less join in. Well, it's a complicated conversation, but I'm confident that they're quite well able to join in and take part in. So, if on that note, should we move to the presentation? Do we want to wait for the others, or should we get going? I think. Will you be? And Kelly, to start, give the first talk on sharing the valuable gift, becoming nourishment.